Most people assume that avoidant men ghost because they don't care, and then feel nothing afterward. But the truth is, avoidant men don't ghost and then skip off into the sunset, feeling free and unburdened. They ghost and then enter a psychological hell that they can never talk about. And the reason why they can never talk about it is because admitting it would require confessing how much you actually meant to them. See, ghosting creates a unique form of emotional torture for avoidant men because it forces them to live with the contradiction between their actions and their feelings. That's why they disappear, because intimacy terrifies them, but then they have to live with missing you while pretending they don't, feeling guilty while justifying their behavior, and grieving a relationship they chose to destroy. The silence after ghosting isn't evidence that they don't care. It's evidence that they care so much it's psychologically unbearable. They can't reach out because that would mean admitting they were wrong. What most women don't understand is that ghosting doesn't end their emotional connection to you. It just forces that connection underground where it becomes toxic, obsessive, and self-destructive. Hi, I'm Gabriel Hart from My Daily Love, and in this video we'll talk about what avoidants feel after ghosting you and why understanding these feelings gives you the closure they'll never be able to give you themselves. Because once you realize that their silence isn't strength, it's suffering, you'll stop waiting for validation and start seeing the ghosting for what it really was. Proof that you touched them deeper than they could handle and that they've been haunted by you ever since. Number 1. Relief mixed with self-hatred. The first thing avoidants feel after ghosting is a profound sense of relief, immediately followed by crushing self-hatred, and they can't understand how they can feel both simultaneously. Think about someone who's been holding their breath underwater and finally surfaces. The relief is immediate and overwhelming. That's what ghosting feels like to an avoidant man, the pressure of having to show up emotionally, to manage your feelings, to navigate the complexity of intimacy. Suddenly, it's all gone. But within hours or days, that relief transforms into something much darker. They start to see themselves clearly as someone who runs from love, who hurts people who care about them, who chooses cowardice over courage. The relief they felt becomes evidence of their own moral failure. Here's what's psychologically twisted about this. They can't talk about the relief because it makes them sound heartless, but they can't talk about the self-hatred because it would require admitting they cared enough to feel guilty. So they say nothing, and the silence becomes its own form of self-punishment. From what I've seen, avoidant men often describe feeling like they're split into two people after ghosting, the part that feels free and the part that feels disgusted with the part that feels free. This internal war is so intense that speaking about it feels impossible. The tragedy is that this cycle of relief and self-hatred actually reinforces their avoidant patterns. They learn that caring leads to guilt, that intimacy leads to the need to escape, that love leads to self-loathing. So they become even more determined to avoid deep connections in the future. Number 2. Obsessive mental replaying of your last interactions. The second thing avoidants feel after ghosting is an obsessive need to replay every detail of your last interactions, searching for evidence that justifies their disappearance. This isn't nostalgia or missing you. This is their mind desperately trying to construct a narrative where ghosting you was the right choice, where you somehow forced their hand, where they're the victim rather than the perpetrator. They'll replay conversations looking for moments when you seemed needy, clingy, or demanding. They'll magnify small disagreements into major incompatibilities. They'll reinterpret your expressions of love as attempts to control them. Their mind becomes a courtroom where they're simultaneously the prosecutor building a case against you and the defendant, trying to prove their innocence. But here's what's psychologically disturbing. Even as they're building this case against you, part of them knows they're lying to themselves. They know they're twisting reality to avoid facing the truth, that they ghosted because they were scared, not because you did anything wrong. In my experience, this mental replaying can go on for months or even years. They become addicted to the process of rewriting history because it's the only way they can live with what they've done. But the fact that they have to keep replaying it proves that they never actually convinced themselves. The most tragic part is that this obsessive replaying prevents them from ever processing what actually happened or learning from it. Instead of facing their fear of intimacy, they become experts at justifying their avoidance. Now, here's what most women don't realize about being ghosted by an avoidant man. Even though you understand what he's going through internally, that knowledge doesn't automatically heal the damage his disappearance caused to your heart and self-worth. You're left with unanswered questions, unfinished emotional business, and often a desperate need to get closure or even get him back. The truth is, there are specific strategies that can help you either find peace and move forward, or if you choose, actually reconnect with him in a way that addresses his avoidant patterns rather than triggering them further. But you need to understand the psychology behind why he left and how to work with it, not against it. There's a program I recommend called the X Factor Guide that teaches you exactly how to handle situations where someone has ghosted or left you. It shows you how to process your own healing, while also giving you the tools to potentially reconnect if that's what you want, but from a position of strength, not desperation. Whether you want closure or a second chance, this guide helps you navigate the aftermath of being ghosted with dignity and power. Check the link in the description if you're ready to take back control of your situation. Number 3. Phantom limb syndrome for your presence. The third thing avoidants feel after ghosting is something I call phantom limb syndrome. They feel your absence like a physical amputation, but they can't acknowledge the pain because that would mean admitting how much you meant to them. Think about how someone who loses a limb still feels sensations where it used to be. Avoidant men experience your absence as a constant low-level ache. They reach for their phone to text you. They think of things they want to tell you. They feel your absence in their daily routines. But acknowledging this phantom pain would require admitting that you had become integrated into their life in ways they never consciously allowed. It would mean confessing that despite all their emotional walls, you had become necessary to their daily emotional regulation. So they experience this constant, unnamed grief while simultaneously denying that they're grieving. They feel the shape of your absence while pretending they don't notice you're gone. They miss you while convincing themselves they don't miss anyone. Over the years, I've noticed that avoidant men often develop strange behaviors after ghosting. They'll drive by places you used to go together. They'll order food you liked. They'll watch shows you recommended. They're unconsciously trying to maintain connection while consciously maintaining distance. The phantom limb syndrome is particularly cruel because it never fully goes away. Years later, they'll still feel twinges of your absence, still have moments where they almost reach out, still carry the ghost of what you meant to them. Number 4. Rage at their own emotional needs. The fourth thing avoidants feel after ghosting is intense rage, not at you, but at themselves for having emotional needs in the first place. The fact that they miss you, that they feel guilty, that they're affected by your absence, all of this feels like evidence of weakness to them. They're furious at themselves for caring, for needing, for being human in ways they've spent their lives trying to transcend. This rage is particularly intense because it confirms their worst fear about themselves, that they're not actually as independent and self-sufficient as they pretend to be. Your absence reveals that they had become emotionally dependent on you, and that dependency feels like a betrayal of their core identity. But here's what's psychologically twisted. They can't express this rage directly because it would require admitting they have emotional needs. So the rage turns inward, becoming self-attack, self-punishment, and deeper commitment to emotional isolation. As a man, I can tell you that this internal rage is one of the most destructive emotions avoidant men experience. It's rage at their own humanity, their own capacity for love, their own need for connection. It's like being angry at yourself for needing air to breathe. This rage often manifests as cynicism about love, dismissiveness about relationships, or cruel comments about people who need others. They're not actually talking about other people, they're expressing their fury at their own emotional needs. 5. Terror that you've moved on. The fifth thing avoidants feel after ghosting is paralyzing terror that you've actually moved on and are living happily without them. This might seem contradictory. If they wanted to leave, why would they be terrified that you've moved on? But the psychology is more complex. They wanted the option to leave, not the reality of being left behind. Ghosting was supposed to give them control over the distance while keeping you emotionally available as a backup option. The idea that you might actually heal, grow, and find someone better threatens their entire psychological strategy. They're terrified that you've realized you're better off without them, that you've stopped thinking about them, that you've found someone who can actually show up for you. This terror reveals the truth they can never admit, that they know you deserved better, and they're afraid you figured that out too. What most women don't realize is that avoidant men often ghost with the unconscious expectation that you'll wait for them, that you'll remain emotionally available for whenever they decide to return. The possibility that you won't wait is genuinely terrifying to them. This terror often drives them to check your social media obsessively, to ask mutual friends about you, or to create situations where they might run into you. They're not trying to reconnect, they're trying to confirm that you're still affected by their absence. Number 6. Shame about their own cowardice. The sixth thing avoidants feel after ghosting is deep corrosive shame about their own cowardice. Shame so intense they can never speak it because doing so would require facing the full extent of their emotional immaturity. They know that ghosting is the coward's way out. They know that someone who truly cared would have had the difficult conversation, would have been honest about their fears, would have given you the closure you deserved. They know they chose the easy path for themselves and the painful path for you. This shame is particularly devastating because it contradicts their self-image as strong, independent, emotionally superior people. Ghosting reveals them to be exactly what they've always feared being seen as: weak, scared, and incapable of handling adult emotions. But acknowledging this shame would require admitting that they're not the emotionally evolved person they pretend to be. It would mean confessing that their independence is actually dependence on avoidance, that their strength is actually weakness disguised. In my experience, this shame often drives avoidant men deeper into isolation. They become convinced that they're too damaged, too cowardly, too emotionally broken to deserve love. The shame becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that keeps them from ever trying to do better. 7. Grief for the relationship that could have been. The seventh thing avoidants feel after ghosting is profound grief for the relationship that could have existed if they had been brave enough to stay and work through their fears. This grief is particularly cruel because it's grief for something that never got the chance to exist. They mourn not just what they had with you, but what they could have had if they had been emotionally available, if they had been willing to grow, if they had chosen courage over comfort. They replay moments of genuine connection and wonder what would have happened if they had leaned into those moments instead of running from them. They imagine versions of themselves that could have loved you properly, and they grieve for both that version of themselves and that version of the relationship. But this grief is complicated by the knowledge that they chose to kill the possibility. They're not grieving something that was taken from them, they're grieving something they destroyed with their own hands. Over the years, I've noticed that this grief often becomes the most persistent emotion avoidant men carry after ghosting. Years later, they'll still wonder, what if? Still imagine how different their life could have been if they had been brave enough to love you properly. 8. Desperate hope that you'll reach out first. The eighth thing avoidants feel after ghosting is desperate, secret hope that you'll reach out first, giving them permission to reconnect without having to take responsibility for their disappearance. They want you to text them, to call them, to show up at their door. Not because they miss you, though they do, but because your reaching out would solve their psychological dilemma. It would allow them to reconnect without having to admit they were wrong to leave, without having to apologize for ghosting, without having to face their own cowardice. If you reach out first, they can frame their return as responding to your need rather than admitting their own. They can maintain the illusion that they're doing you a favor by coming back rather than confessing that they need you. This hope is particularly twisted because it requires you to do the emotional labor of repairing the damage they caused. They want the benefits of reconnection without the responsibility of making amends. But here's what's most disturbing. They often interpret your silence as confirmation that you never really cared about them. If you don't reach out, it proves, in their mind, that they were right to leave, that you weren't as invested as you seemed, that ghosting was justified. 9. The realization that they've become the villain in your story. The ninth and perhaps most devastating thing avoidants feel after ghosting is the gradual realization that they've become the villain in your story. The person who hurt you, who taught you not to trust, who made love feel dangerous. This realization is particularly painful because most avoidant men don't see themselves as cruel or harmful people. They see themselves as protecting themselves, as making difficult but necessary choices, as being honest about their limitations. But as time passes, they begin to understand the impact of their actions. They realize that their ghosting didn't just end a relationship. It potentially damaged your ability to trust, to love openly, to believe that people will stay. They've become the cautionary tale you tell your friends, the reason you're more guarded in future relationships. This realization is so painful that many avoidant men spend years trying to convince themselves that you're better off without them, or that you probably don't even think about it anymore. But deep down, they know they've left a mark, and not a good one. The tragedy is that this realization often comes too late, when reaching out would only cause more harm, when the damage is already done, when the only thing left to do is carry the weight of knowing they chose their comfort over your heart. Now, here's what happens when you understand the psychological hell that avoidant men go through after ghosting. You realize that their silence isn't strength, it's suffering. Their disappearance isn't evidence that you didn't matter, it's proof that you mattered so much they couldn't handle it. You stop waiting for closure from someone who's drowning in their own emotional chaos and can't even give closure to themselves. But here's what this understanding reveals about love itself. The very fact that an avoidant man would put himself through this psychological torture rather than face his feelings shows you just how powerful genuine love actually is. His ghosting isn't evidence that love doesn't exist. It's evidence that love is so overwhelming, so transformative, so threatening to his carefully constructed walls that he'd rather destroy himself than surrender to it. This makes you wonder, what does it look like when a man is actually brave enough to face those feelings? What happens when someone doesn't run from the intensity of genuine love, but instead lets it transform them? See, while avoidant men are torturing themselves in silence after ghosting, there are men out there who are doing the opposite. Men who are so moved by love that they can't help but express it, even when it makes them vulnerable. These men don't ghost when love gets intense. Instead, they start saying things that reveal just how deeply they've been affected. They use language that shows love has fundamentally changed them, rewired their priorities, and made them brave enough to be vulnerable. The difference between a man who ghosts and a man who truly loves isn't about the intensity of the feelings, it's about the courage to face those feelings and let them transform him. So if you want to discover the 4 specific things a man starts doing when he's genuinely in love and brave enough to let it change him, please click the video showing on your screen right now to watch it, and you'll see what he says when he's ready.